Good morning everyone and welcome to this briefing ahead of the first plenary session of 2023, which will be held in Strasbourg next week. As you know, I'm Neil Corlett, Head of Parliament's Press Service, and standing in for Delphine today, Friday the 13th of January. Amongst other issues on the agenda for the session next week are a debate on the programme of the Swedish presidency, which began on the 1st of January, with Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, a debate on the outcome of the December EU summit, which focused primarily on Ukraine and assistance for the country. The debate will take place with Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen. A debate on the prosecution of Russian war criminals in Ukraine, the situation in Iran, the adoption of Parliament's position on new legislation on waste shipments, and a vote to approve the mandate for negotiations on the Platform Workers Directive, as well as a commemoration for the 30th anniversary of the EU's single market, the election of a new Vice President for the European Parliament, and a topical debate on the rule of law in Spain. On Monday, then more specifically, Parliament will decide on the draft mandate to negotiate with Council on measures to improve conditions for workers on digital labour platforms. The mandate will be announced during the opening of the session, and if no objections are raised by MEPs, it will be approved without a vote after 24 hours. Otherwise, there will be a confirmation vote on Thursday. The new rules are set to improve conditions for workers on digital labour platforms as they focus on combating false self-employment in platform work, which may lead to precarious working conditions and a lack of social protection, but also to unfair competition, especially for SMEs. The Media Directorate of Parliament will hold a briefing for journalists who are in Strasbourg on the topic with lead MEP Elisabetta Gualmini on this issue on Wednesday lunchtime in room N3.3. If you want more information, you can contact me or one of my colleagues. Following a request from Belgian judicial authorities investigating corruption allegations implicating some MEPs, President Metsola is expected to announce on Monday that the request to waive the immunity of 2 of its members has been received and will now be examined. She has indicated a wish to expedite the procedure rapidly with a view to possibly concluding at the next part session in February. In a separate case, the European Public Prosecutor's Office has also requested in December, you may recall, that the immunity of 2 members be lifted in relation to the management of their parliamentary allowances. In order to examine this request, Parliament must first amend its rules of procedure to align them with the EPPO's mandate in a vote on Tuesday. The President is then set to announce the launch of this separate procedure later on during the session. As I mentioned, we're marking the 30th anniversary of the EU's single market. A short ceremony and a debate will be held after the opening of the session with the Commission on Monday afternoon. MEPs will adopt a resolution on Wednesday, on the 30th anniversary of the EU single market. The European single market, as you know, continues to be one of the EU's greatest achievements and an essential tool in times of crisis, creating the grounds for peace, stability and prosperity. Still on Monday, MEPs will debate a draft text on the shipment of waste and vote on the following day before starting discussions with the EU governments. The legislation aims to reform the EU's procedures and controls for waste shipments, including stricter rules for waste exports outside the EU. In 2020, for example, such exports of waste to third countries reached 32.7 million tonnes, representing about 16% of global waste trade. The legislation should improve environmental and human health protection and move towards the EU's circular economy and zero pollution targets. Moving to Tuesday, we have the Swedish Council presidency and the debate with Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson. Sweden's 4 priorities for its presidency are security, competitiveness, green and energy transition, democratic values and the rule of law. And I've just had confirmation that a press conference will follow the debate in the Daphne Caruana Galizia press room around 11:30 after the debate. On Russia, on Tuesday afternoon, MEPs will question the Commission on the prospects for setting up a tribunal to consider prosecuting Russia for the crime of aggression against Ukraine, and a resolution will be put to the vote on Thursday. To recall, Parliament adopted a resolution in May last year calling on the EU to take all necessary measures to support the prosecution of the Russian and Belarusian regimes for war crimes following the invasion of Ukraine. Parliament also labelled Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism in November. On Iran, Also, Tuesday afternoon, MEPs will address the situation there in that country and debate the EU's response to the demonstrations and executions with EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell. The EU is currently discussing a fourth round of sanctions due to the regime's crackdown and Iran's military support for Russia. The vote on the resolution will also take place on Thursday. Then on Wednesday, we've got a key debate with the Council President and Commission President on the outcome of the December EU summit, which, as I say, focused primarily on Ukraine and the EU's coordinated response to soaring energy prices. On Wednesday lunchtime, we'll have a vote on the new Vice President for Parliament, following the termination of Eva Kaili's responsibilities as Vice President in December. Based on Parliament's rules of procedure, if there is a vacancy, a new Vice President is elected to replace him or her in the same order of precedence. So the MEP elected on Wednesday will become Parliament's fifth Vice President. Nominations may be made by 1/20th of the MEPs of Parliament or by a political group until Monday evening. And the candidate must obtain an absolute majority of the votes cast by secret ballot in order to be elected. And then finally, Wednesday afternoon, we have a debate on the so-called Uber files. MEPs will discuss with the Council and the Commission the recent revelations about Uber's past lobbying practices in the EU, the situation of Uber drivers in Europe, and the extent to which Uber's lobbying activities have affected their social and labour rights. You may recall in October last year, Parliament hosted Uber's former chief lobbyist, Mark McGann, at a hearing on the rights of workers on European platforms following the leak of these so-called Uber files. And finally, for those journalists present in Strasbourg next week, we will be hosting a New Year's reception, which we haven't done since before the pandemic. It'll take place on Tuesday evening at 6:30, and invitations will be distributed on your desks in Strasbourg. Thank you very much. Now it's time to pass on to the political groups for their take on next week, starting with the EPP Group spokesperson, Pedro Lopez.
Bonjour Neil, bonjour à tous et mes meilleurs vœux pour 2023 parce que certains d'entre vous, je ne vous avais pas encore vu. Et cette session, ça va être marqué pour le 30e anniversaire du marché unique qui ne nous rajeunit pas du tout, n'est-ce pas Neil? Mais que ça me fait sourire parce que beaucoup regrettent l'absence de marché unique maintenant, surtout au Royaume-Uni, n'est-ce pas? Et c'est pour ça qu'il faut célébrer que ça fait 30 ans qu'on réjouit tous dans le même marché. Et pour les groupes du PP, il y aura 3 points importants dans la session plénière. Le premier, c'est la présidence suédoise, parce que c'est une présidence qui va traiter des sujets qui sont au cœur de la politique du groupe du PPE. Le premier, c'est récupérer la compétitivité de l'économie européenne. Et le deuxième, c'est résoudre les problèmes de l'immigration et l'asile en Europe, et qu'on n'a pas réussi depuis 2015, et on va essayer pendant ce semestre suédois avec un sommet spécial sur le sujet qui a été convoqué par le gouvernement suédois le 9 et le 10 février. Et le deuxième point pour nous important, c'est les débats et les votes d'une résolution dans laquelle on va demander la création d'une cour spéciale, un tribunal spécial pour juger les crimes de guerre en Ukraine. Et le troisième point, Neil l'a mentionné, c'est le débat topical debate de mercredi après-midi sur l'état des droits en Espagne. Parce que normalement, si le gouvernement espagnol n'était pas un gouvernement de gauche, il y aurait beaucoup de groupes politiques dans cette maison qui seraient en train de demander l'ouverture de l'article 7 contre l'Espagne. Et donc, nous, avec ce débat, on veut bien mettre ou souligner qu'il y a des poids et des mesures parfois aussi dans cette maison. Sinon, le président du groupe, comme d'habitude, il sera dans la conférence de presse de mardi à 11h pour vous tous, pour répondre à vos questions. Et si vous avez d'autres sujets à aborder de cette session, moi et mon équipe, on est prêt à répondre à vos questions plus tard. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Pedro. And now Ute for the Progressives Group.
Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. Thank you, Neil. And for those in the room and on the screens, all the very best. For the year to come, I would like to start with a topic that, of course, is in the news since several weeks now. That's the Qatargate and the wider judicial investigation. As you might have read and heard from us since the allegations came up, we have shown and followed a clear policy on zero tolerance for corruption since the beginning. We are totally committed to work with the rest of the groups to rebuild citizens' trust and repair the damage done by a few to the credibility of the institution by criminal acts. You might have seen our press release yesterday following the COP, at which our group president Irache García Pérez presented a first set of proposals we are discussing also within our group to combat corruption and foreign interference from third countries and lobbies in this House. In addition to these measures, we are also discussing since December, where we started to discuss on a mandate about an internal S&D inquiry. And on this we are discussing within our group and will come forward shortly with proposals on that. With regard to the proposals put forward by the President of this House, Metsola, our President made it clear yesterday that we, of course, welcome those, but think that in some areas we need to go further, so to strengthen transparency and ethics as well as the Code of Conduct. So some measures must be strengthened, and we also think that there must be new measures and new bodies. You can read all our statement yesterday in the press release. As you might have also read, we have elected this week our candidate for the Vice President of the European Parliament. This is Marc Angel, head of the Luxembourg S&D delegation. We had a fully transparent and open process within our group. He has the full support of our group, and we are confident that we will win a strong and solid majority for him next week. With this, I would like to come to the other topics. Of course, the Swedish presidency, we are worried about the support of the far right and the government in Sweden. We will be extremely vigilant with the Swedish presidency in the next 6 months. We are, of course, worried that they close down the Environment Ministry, but we will fight for the Green Deal and other priorities to be respected. Then I would like to mention, of course, the report. I won't go into detail, just to say that it is very important that we discuss on the terrible situation in Iran, and we call for an immediate end to the Iranian regime's brutality. And another file that was mentioned by Neil is, of course, the mandate for the trilogue on platform workers, and also the lobbying practices on the Uber files. We have been very clear on the platform workers throughout all the process, also the vote in the committee, and it is high time to make sure that the gig workers enjoy similar strong protection rights as non-gig workers. So there we are very happy that this is coming to the plenary now. As Neil mentioned, there will be a press point with Elisabetta Gualmini, our Vice President of the group, and so also it is good that we look into the lobbying practices that heavily took place. Maybe one final word on the EPP comment right now on Spain. I think it is very clear and readable in the Constitution that Spain is a solid democracy. And we are actually rather shocked and disappointed that this House is being used for national policy making and national campaigning. So we hope that the practice of using a topical debate for a national debate won't become the standard. We, in the last one, when we discussed social rights and support for Ukraine, for support for the people, but with already another event like this where a discussion was put in the past for Bulgaria by the EPP, we would not want to see this trend continuing in the future. But of course, we support the rule of law, the defense of the rule of law in any member state. Thank you.
Thank you, Uta. Now, Clara de Beneponte for the Renew Group.
Thank you very much, Neil. Bonjour à tous et bonne année. Et merci une autre fois de participer au pré-briefing du groupe Renew Europe pour vous présenter nos priorités pour la prochaine session plénière à Strasbourg. Mais avant de vous présenter notre priorité, nous voudrions dire un mot sur les Qatargate et notre réponse à ces scandales. Tout d'abord, nous voudrions être très clairs. Renew Europe va continuer à travailler pour lutter contre la corruption et pour la transparence, parce que nous ne pouvons pas permettre qu'un cas comme les Qatargate pollue l'image de toutes les institutions européennes et concrètement du Parlement. C'est pour ça que nous avons demandé et nous allons insister à défendre surtout deux mesures. Tout d'abord, la création d'une haute autorité pour la transparence de la vie publique à niveau européen. Et deuxièmement, la création aussi d'un code de conduite interinstitutionnel. Après aussi, nous partageons les mesures, en termes généraux, les mesures présentées pour la présidente du Parlement pour établir plus de transparence avec les finances et activités des eurodéputés. Mais nous avons demandé aussi à la présidente du Parlement de respecter et mettre en œuvre la résolution adoptée déjà à la dernière session plénière en décembre à Strasbourg, et aussi d'établir un timing, un calendrier. Nous pensons qu'on doit le faire vite. Et pour nous, un calendrier qui peut être possible, c'est de solutionner et mettre en œuvre toutes les mesures avant que l'été arrive. Alors nous allons pousser, nous allons insister parce que vraiment, nous pensons que nous devons continuer à lutter contre la corruption pour éviter plus de cas comme les Qatargate. Voilà alors sur les Qatargate, et de l'autre côté, par rapport au débat de la prochaine session plénière, nous voudrions souligner trois priorités. Tout d'abord, les question time sur l'inflation et des prix alimentaires, c'est une priorité et aussi une inquiétude pour les citoyens. Deuxièmement, les stratégies de l'Union européenne pour stimuler la compétitivité industrielle, le commerce et les emplois de qualité. Et troisièmement, la réponse de l'Europe aux exécutions en Iran. So for the first point on the food price inflation, this will be a question time taking place on Tuesday. We all know and experienced already that the crisis caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine have put food price, food security, and the resilience of the global food system in question. This is having a direct effect to the cost of living of the citizens, and we in the European Union must react. You know that the Eurozone inflation fell down the last month to 9.2%, which is good news indeed, but people just see that food prices and prices in general remain extremely higher, which hits household purchasing powers and reduces the competitiveness of businesses and industry. So in the Renew Europe group, we have a plan. We launched an action plan on food security to address the food crisis, focus on resilience and sustainability, on the food supply chain, and on investments in accelerating sustainability and autonomy both in the EU in developing countries. Besides that, we'll call also for contingency plans in a national and in a European level to implement anti-crisis measures to tackle food price. On the second point, an energy strategy to boost industrial competitiveness, trade and quality jobs. This is a debate taking place on Wednesday, suggested by the Renew Europe group. As said, our citizens are suffering this economic crisis, but also our companies. And we have also a plan, we presented it this week, is a plan for a competitive, productive and innovative industry with one goal, strengthening union sovereignty by renewing our European industrial policy. So we will present this plan on the debate. And finally, the third point on the debate on the EU response to the protests and executions in Iran. This will take place on Tuesday. As you know, according to some official sources, at least 43 people, 43, are currently facing execution in Iran. And some NGOs fear the number could be as high as 100. This is unacceptable. This is clearly a strategy from the Iranian regime to try to stop people to speak out and flood the streets, as happened after the death of the 20-year-old Mahsa Jina Amini. And our political groups keeps on calling for individual EU sanctions against those responsible for human rights violations. Finally, we cannot finish this press conference without mentioning the urgency resolution on the storming of the Brazilian democratic institutions. After the anti-democratic storming of the three powers in Brasilia last Sunday, very much alike the storming of the Capitol in Washington 2 years ago, sadly, we need to have a firm response on what Europe will do about raising transnational fascism and anti-democracy in Europe and beyond. And this is what we will defend in the plenary session. Voici donc les priorités du groupe Renew Europe. Finalement, je voudrais vous informer que la conférence de presse de notre président, Stéphane Séjourné, aura lieu mardi prochain à 10h20 et mon équipe et moi serons à Strasbourg la semaine prochaine. Alors, si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à les poser. Merci.
Merci, Clara. Can I invite Simon McKeagney now for the Greens EFA Group?
Morning, everyone. Hope you had a quiet Christmas and Happy New Year. It's going to be a pretty busy pre-election year for all of us, and it certainly started with the continuing fallout of the Qatar and European Parliament corruption scandal. As many of you know, the Greens have long fought for the strengthening of rules around transparency, lobbying and integrity of the Parliament. And now is really the time to seize the momentum and reform our rules. We all have the responsibility now to rebuild the trust of this institution less than a year and a half before the European elections, but also because it's obviously very much the right thing to do. We've sent a letter to Metsola yesterday following the updated list of measures she proposed at COP. And while her proposals are very welcome and the initiative is very welcome and overdue, in comparison to other groups, there are some additional points that we have, and I'll highlight three of those. Our demand, firstly, for a special committee with a strong mandate on transparency and anti-corruption is not a detail. There's a real risk of the reform agenda becoming a technocratic exercise conducted behind closed doors in advisory groups and other fora that have not delivered on transparency and lobbying reform that MEPs themselves have voted for in the past in resolutions. So an open and transparent committee, special committee, would bolster momentum for real change with nowhere to hide when it comes to tackling the real issues. The second thing is whistleblower protection. There's a very real reason why staff aren't coming forward. I think there's been no staff have come forward in the last few years when it comes to whistleblower protection. We need to bring the EP in line with the EU's own whistleblower directive and amend the staff regulation to protect people when they come forward with potential cases of corruption. This is sorely lacking in everyone's proposals currently. And lastly, we need to install proper oversight and enforcement mechanisms, including sanctions when staff and MEPs fail to live up to the standards of expected in public office. Rules are only worth the paper they're written on if they can be enforced, and the procedures are less than clear for everyone. You can read our letter and our eight additional points rather. It's on Twitter, it's on our website. It was sent to press yesterday after it was sent to Metsola. The importance of all this is one of the reasons why we're presenting our own candidate for the vice president position. Gwendolyn Delbois-Corfield is our candidate. She has many years of experience in tackling issues of transparency, democracy, rule of law. Many of you know her as the standing rapporteur for the Parliament on the situation in Hungary. She's worked with colleagues from many political groups closely and in a constructive way. She's a member of the Constitutional Affairs Committee, the Inquiry Committee to investigate the Pegasus scandal, the Special Committee on Foreign Interference. So in short, she's the right woman for the job. She's running on a platform of protecting democracy, strengthening accountability, and rebuilding trust with citizens. You can tune in on Monday night at 7, where she'll answer questions from citizens on our live stream on our channels, and she'll also join our co-president Terry Ranka on Tuesday morning at 10:40 during our presidential press conference. On the points for next week, we echo many of the points been made, particularly on Iran. I won't repeat. Just one joint interconnected issue, which is the important subject of right-wing populism, extremism, and right-wing terrorism. Before Christmas, we saw a right-wing extremist network uncovered in Germany with plans to attack the Bundestag. Now we've witnessed the pretty crazy attack and failed coup attempt on Brazil's democratic institutions. At our request on Wednesday, both issues will be tackled. A more general point that I think cozying up or tacitly trying to co-opt messaging of the hard right is a dangerous road, and it's appearing more and more here in Europe. It's something that we will continue to call out. The Swedish presidency has also started with our co-president, Philippe Lamberts, will speak on Tuesday morning at that debate. Our message to the new Swedish government, despite the very concerning position so far on climate and energy proposals, is to use this presidency to accelerate the EU's climate ambition, not to slow it down. But we'll see you in Strasbourg. A full email of our priorities will be in your inbox at lunchtime today, and we see you at the press briefing on Tuesday at 10:40. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. And now for the Independent and Democracy Group, Tobias Duscher.
Guten Tag. Guten Tag und herzlich willkommen im neuen Jahr im Panikmodus. Bevor wir nach Straßburg kommen, sind wir schon mit einer ganzen Reihe von Spiegelstrichlisten mit enthusiastischen Reformvorschlägen im Panikmodus konfrontiert. Wir werden mal sehen, ob hier nicht wieder der dritte Schritt vor dem ersten getan wird und die große Frage nach der Spitze des Eisbergs nicht sich noch einmal gestellt wird. Wir dürfen ja nicht vergessen, dass das, was uns gerade beschäftigt, nur im Menschenrechtsausschuss stattgefunden hat. Also im Unterausschuss Menschenrechte, der nun wirklich nicht das Epizentrum der Wirtschaftsbeziehungen mit Katar und Marokko und anderen ist. Das heißt, es wäre doch viel spannender, erstmal abzuwarten, was im Auswärtigen Ausschuss passiert ist oder im Ausschuss für internationalen Handel oder im Industrieausschuss, also da, wo die wirklich harten Sachen verhandelt werden, wo auch alle viel mehr Geld verdienen können, als im Menschenrechtsausschuss. Aber derzeit sind wir gegenüber eines kompletten Faktenmangels, weil niemand genau was weiß. Das, was man weiß, liest man in der Presse. Und vielleicht ist es tatsächlich besser, dass wir jetzt erstmal die Staatsanwaltschaften ihre Arbeit machen lassen, um die strafbewährten Fakten zu entdecken und wir hier mit einem Untersuchungsausschuss die hausinternen Probleme untersuchen, so wie es ja auch beim Pegasus-Verfahren war, dass einerseits die Staatsanwaltschaften ihre Aufgabe gemacht haben und ein Untersuchungsausschuss hier ebenfalls gearbeitet hat. Bei den Reformvorschlägen, die derzeit unterwegs sind, muss man auch Vorsicht walten lassen. 3 Beispiele. Es wird jetzt davon gesprochen, einen Ethikrat einzusetzen, dem alle Institutionen der EU unterwerfen werden sollen. Das klingt gut. Aber ein Ethikrat für alle Institutionen bedeutet auch beispielsweise die Richter am luxemburgischen Europäischen Gerichtshof in Luxemburg. Ein Ethikrat für Richter. Klingelt da eine Glocke? Das ist genau das, was den Polen gerade vorgeworfen wird und weswegen sogar Covid-Entwicklungshilfegelder für Polen eingefroren werden. Ja, das Prinzip ist dasselbe. Jetzt wird es verlangt für die Richter des EuGH, währenddessen es für die polnischen nationalen Richter zu großen politischen Auseinandersetzungen führt. Ein anderes Beispiel ist die Zwangspause, die jetzt gefordert wird für Mitglieder, wenn sie ihr Mandat abgeben. Das würde bedeuten, dass kaum mehr einer hierher kommen würde wollen, das sei denn für die Tagegelder, wenn jetzt schon feststeht, dass nach Ende des Mandates die angewandte Erfahrung nicht in weiteren Arbeitsverwendungen genutzt werden kann. Wozu nutzt es mir also, hier eine Erfahrung zu sammeln, wenn ich danach verpflichtet bin, sie nicht weiter anzuwenden und 2 Jahre, 3 Jahre aussetzen zu müssen? Und warum gilt das eigentlich nicht auch im umgekehrten Fall? Also, wenn einer ein NGO-Aktivist ist, warum muss der eigentlich nicht eine Zwangspause von 2 Jahren machen, bevor er hier Abgeordneter werden darf? Ganz im Gegenteil. Es wird sich sogar auf die Fahnen geschrieben, voller Stolz, dass man als Aktivist ins Parlament geht. Also entweder gleiche Regeln in beiden Richtungen oder man muss halt überlegen, wie es am besten funktioniert. Und was ist eigentlich mit den Journalisten? So einfach wie es ist, einen Journalistenbadge zu bekommen, das ist schon erstaunlich. Also selbst wenn ich ein alter Abgeordneter bin und nicht mehr arbeiten darf als Lobbyist wegen des Transparenzregisters, dann lasse ich mir eine Bestätigung schreiben, dass ich Editorial schreibe und dann bekomme ich einen Journalistenbadge und habe dann auch freien Zugang. Und es steht ja nicht mal auf einer Liste, die öffentlich im Moment zugänglich ist. Wichtigster Punkt ist nächste Woche sicherlich die Wahl des 5. Vizepräsidenten. Es hat viele überrascht, in der Presse zu erfahren, dass wir 14 haben. Aber das, was noch überraschender ist, ist, dass die Sozialdemokraten tatsächlich einen Kandidaten aufstellen. Also wir haben ja gemerkt, dass dieser ganze Schlamassel von den Sozialdemokraten kommt. Und es wäre doch eigentlich normal gewesen, aus Buße und aus Reue für die letzten 1,5 Jahre der Laufzeit zu sagen, wir verzichten auf diesen Posten. Und nicht nur sie verzichten nicht, sondern sie ersetzen einen Mann für eine Frau. Also die Geschlechtergleichheit, die sonst immer von den Sozialdemokraten so hoch gelobt wird, ist ja offensichtlich doch nicht so wichtig. Sonst hätten sie eine Frau ausgesucht, um eine Frau zu ersetzen. Wir jedenfalls haben uns daran gehalten und wir schlagen Frau Tardino vor, Annalisa Tardino, eine Abgeordnete der Lega aus Sizilien, die derzeit als Koordinatorin im LIBE-Ausschuss arbeitet. Letzter Punkt. Ein Gutes hatte die Affäre, weil es wird jetzt auch die Geschäftsordnung angewandt im Hinblick auf die Ausarbeitung der Dringlichkeitsentschließungen. Sie wissen, diese Sachen, die keiner liest und die ellenlang sind, die einen Haufen Geld kosten, um verdolmetscht zu werden, übersetzt zu werden und so weiter. Obwohl in der Geschäftsordnung seit eh und je steht, dass sie nicht länger als 500 Worte sein dürfen. Hat sich nie jemand dran gehalten. In der vergangenen Sitzungswoche im Dezember hat unser Mitglied Gunnar Beck dazu mal eine Stellungnahme eingefordert. Und von nun an gilt, dass Dringlichkeitsentschließungen nur noch 500 Worte lang sein können, wenn sie im Plenum eingereicht werden. Ein richtiger Schritt. Vielleicht sollte man auch bei der Ausarbeitung der Dringlichkeiten oder der Sinnhaftigkeit der Dringlichkeiten sich die Katar-Marokko-Affäre noch mal vor Augen führen, um zu sehen, was man auch da verbessern kann. Und damit wünsche ich Ihnen einen guten Start in das neue Jahr. Danke.
Thank you, Tobias. I might just say that accreditation procedure for journalists is slightly more involved than writing a few articles, but if you want to check it out, the procedure is on our website. Right, next up is Michael Strauss for the ECR Group.
Thank you, Neil. Good morning, everyone, and a belated Happy New Year for me too. For next week, the ECR Group has 5 priorities to highlight. Firstly, a happy thing. We are happy to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the European single market on Monday, as the ECR Group considers free movement of people, goods, services and capital as the greatest achievement of the EU, forming the backbone of the EU economy, as well as being a project of peace and stability for the entire continent. The ECR, as a dedicated free market group, are eager to help strengthen and develop it further, especially in services for the nearer future, in order to secure Europe's prosperity for future generations. Secondly, in the debate on Tuesday, we will join the calls for the establishment of a special tribunal that deals with Russian soldiers, commanders and politicians, including at the highest levels of power, and to try them for aggression and war crimes against Ukrainians, including genocide. In June 2022, Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk confirmed that over 1 million Ukrainians had been forcibly deported to Russia, where they live under squalid conditions and many of them have been tortured. The ECR Group will also demand the establishment of a set of mechanisms for frozen Russian funds to be put to use as compensation and for the payment of reparations by Russia. Thirdly, in the debate immediately following, we will point out that the EU cannot longer stand by idly and must effectively sanction the Iranian regime, which is suppressing its own people's desire for freedom. We must call all member states to include the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on the EU terror list and to suspend negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal. We must hit the Islamic Republic's elite, and we must hit persons involved in the suppression of pro-democracy activities in the country. Not to forget, we must hit those involved in Russia's war crimes in Ukraine by delivering drones that target civilians and civilian infrastructure. We also join the calls for the immediate and unconditional release of all those arrested and for the Iranian regime to stop executing protesters. Fourthly, when we discussed the priorities of the Swedish presidency on Tuesday morning, the ECR Group will welcome Prime Minister Christensen's commitment to economic and military support for Ukraine and to strengthening the EU's trade competitiveness, especially against the current backdrop of multiple crises. On the other hand, the ECR Group would like to see more effort put towards securing the EU's external borders. Swedish ECR Vice President Charlie Weimers will also stress that the work of the French and Czech presidencies on tightening EU financial rules with regard to Islamist organizations within the EU must be continued. And last, but by no means least, yes, it is necessary and right that we elect a new Vice President on Wednesday in order to avert further damage to this House standing. The ECR Group finds the bribery being exposed in the so-called Equatorgate scandal shocking. It is absolutely clear that the European Parliament cannot go on without a meaningful intervention. In this regard, we fully support President Metsola, who has presented a first set of proposals at yesterday's Conference of Presidents, as well as her plan and the chosen procedure in which all groups are involved to strengthen the integrity, independence and accountability of the institution. The ECR Group welcomes this commitment to pursuing an internal follow-up and a comprehensive reform. It is important now that the S&D Group reacts to this decisively. Ultimately, the political parties are responsible for the integrity of their members. Rules should be there to set limits, but rules can never fully replace personal integrity. And this is where I wrap up. My colleagues and I are available to answer any questions. See you in Strasbourg. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Very concise. And now, finally, David Lundy for the Left Group.
Thanks, Neil. Just a few points from the left, starting with the ongoing corruption and bribery bin fire. While President Metzola's proposals to strengthen integrity and accountability are a welcome start, the plan of action is just not good enough. The measures adopted should correspond to those demanded by the European Parliament in its resolution in December at the plenary session, including strong revolving doors rules. It's always interesting to hear the far right echo the demands of the corporate lobbying sector. But unless we get serious about ethics and the need to sweep aside the culture of opacity that prevails in this House, this issue will continue to haunt the European Parliament. This is not about a few rotten apples. This is about tackling a rotten culture. On the Swedish presidency, political figures once associated with violent racism and Nazi sympathisers who have built their careers by dividing people against each other and by scapegoating the vulnerable are now shoring up the Swedish government and controlling the agenda of the EU's most powerful institution. Our main aim over the next 6 months will be damage control and making sure the right-wing government in Sweden is held accountable here in Brussels and also in Stockholm. On Uber's European lobbying machine, this is a point we've been demanding for the agenda agenda since September 2022, consistently opposed by most other groups. So it's good to see us finally there. Alongside this debate on the Uber files, Parliament will also have an opportunity to decide whether the Platform Workers Directive is pro-worker or pro-corporate lobbies. Some MEPs from EPP, ECR and Renew are looking to sabotage an agreed text that would give platform workers decent employment rights. Remember, these workers kept our societies and our economies running throughout the worst months of the recent global pandemic without ever receiving the compensation they rightfully deserve, and while the companies they work for raked in billions in profits and engaged in the darkest of the dark arts of corporate lobbying in this town. MEPs, especially in the current context of legitimate public doubts about who the hell we're actually working for in these buildings, and in the context of the cost of living crisis, have an extra responsibility to guarantee these workers decent working conditions and legal employment status. I'll leave it there. Our press briefing with our co-presidents is on Tuesday at 11:20. Also, Left MEPs Manu Pineda and Leila Shaibi will hold a press conference on Wednesday at 10 a.m. on the case of Salah Hamouri, who's a Palestinian human rights defender who was illegally imprisoned in Israel and recently deported to France. As usual, don't hesitate to get in touch if we can help you out with anything with myself or my colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. That's the end of the political group spokespersons round. We can now pass to questions, if there are any, either online. If you're online and you have a question, please just press the raise your hand button and we can take you here in the room. If not, are there any questions, first of all, in the room? No, everyone was very clear. I don't see any questions online either. So I can close the press briefing. Thank you very much. And I'll see you in Strasbourg. There will be another last-minute briefing at 4:30 in the Strasbourg press room with our spokesperson, Jamie Duke. Thank you very much.